But in this one, in The Dying Grass, I believe that William T. Vollmann has reached the apogee of his artistic vision for the Seven Dreams. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I am going to talk about The Dying Grass by William T. Vollmann. I'm also going to set myself a challenge, and that is to do a short job of it, as short a job as I possibly can. I got in touch with my complaints department, and they said there are two chief complaints right now. One is that you are doing almost exclusively long videos. People want some short videos. And two, you haven't done anything with William T. Vollmann in a while. Okay, I admit I actually wrote that complaint and sent it into my own department. But I figured I would fold the two of those together and do a William T. Vollmann and keep it as short as possible. I want to get it in one take and keep it under 25 minutes. So here we go. All right, first of all, I can skip a lot of preamble that I'm sort of like inclined to do when talking about William T. Vollmann, because I have a bunch of videos. I have more videos on his work than I think anyone else here on the channel, including one early video that's horribly shot and very clunky, but I'm just sort of telling you why I love reading his work, why it's inspiring, why it's invigorating, so on and so on. I also urge you to read a very recent essay by Alexander Sorondo. Amazing. It's on his Substack. I'll put a link in the video description. One of the best pieces on William T. Vollmann I've read. And he also says that he's working on a tribute piece to my dear friend Michael Silverblatt. So that's just wonderful news. And Alexander has already proven his mettle in handling the journalism he does for the William T. Vollmann piece. And so I can't wait to see what he brings for Michael Silverblatt. Anyway, I've got a link to that in the description. I'll put a link to my other videos. I've also did a really short, like 500-word piece on Conversations with William T. Vollmann book for Rain Taxi back in that interesting year of 2020 that sort of really compresses and lays out the main points and the things that you're used to hearing whenever you encounter. So all of that preamble just now to point you to other more bloviated preamble. The Dying Grass. This is the fifth dream of the seven dreams. I think I've done them all except the rifles now, so the rifles will be next because I highly doubt the Cloud Shirt, of which we have an excerpt that was published in Grand Street, or whatever the other one's going to be called, Poison Shirt, I don't know. Just to clear the air, the forthcoming Table for Fortune is not part of the Seven Dreams. It is a novel that focuses on the CIA, and it is going to be published in 4 volumes by Arcade Publishing next year. As soon as there's a pre-order, I am going to just take high-res images of my credit card and post them online. Now, I don't know what I'm talking about, but you know, you can hear that I'm enthusiastic about reading that. He cannot write a book too long for me because I love reading his work. He has figured out I don't want to call it a formula, but he has figured out his thing. All right, he's been writing. He writes like crazy, and he's been doing so since the very beginning. Interestingly, in The Dying Grass, it's his longest book of the Seven Dreams, almost his longest single volume book, although I think Imperial is longer, so we can call it his longest single volume novel. It's about 1,200 pages of actual story text and then 100 or so of end notes that in themselves are extremely interesting and really illuminate the overall experience. But in this one, in The Dying Grass, I believe that William T. Vollmann has reached the apogee of his artistic vision for the Seven Dreams. And one way in which he does this is with the layout on the page. He figured out this system of indentation. And in his acknowledgments, he even acknowledges his designer and a team of people who apparently put together a coding system there at the publishing house to achieve this toilsome system of indentations. When I first held this volume and flipped through it many, many moons ago, when I saw the title here, The Dying Grass, and then I flipped through, and you can't not notice how different the look of the text is on the page. It looked to me immediately like long prairie grass swaying in the wind. Whether or not that was a visual effect that was intended, I'm not sure. But it has that effect, and then it also it works to capture the panoply of characters and voices and time frames and on and on and on. And so what I mean by that is that we may get an indentation that represents a dip into a focalized character's internal monologue, right? And then it may go back and switch to another and focalize on a different character, and then indentation to capture their interior monologue, and then maybe another indentation to capture the interior monologue of the other actor that we now know is there with them. And these indentations can go like to something like 8 sublevels, maybe 9. I think 8 was one that I counted, but it captures just this layering of a complicated situation, that situation being the Nez Perce War. So this is when the U.S. Army put General Howard in charge of going and addressing the skirmishes that are happening with the Nez Perce people there about Oregon, Idaho area, and then basically drive them into a severely reduced reservation. The Nez Perce were unwilling to cooperate, and this led to a bunch of different flare-ups and skirmishes and a chase across Oregon, Idaho, Montana, almost allowing Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce to escape into the British territories, that being Canada, of course. But eventually, Chief Joseph and a contingent of something like 400 Nez Perce surrendered and voluntarily allowed themselves to be captured and put in this prison, what they referred to as Painted Land. Very complicated, because General Howard, who is really brought to life here, is quite a complicated man, the way that Emily Wilson refers to Odysseus in her new translation of Homer's epic as a complicated man. Howard is an interesting choice to carry out such a thing because he had great compassion for black people and newly freed black people. This is set against the very recent backdrop of the Civil War or the War of Secession, Lincoln's assassination, and so on. A lot of people hate Howard because of his sympathy and the things he did to try and empower freed black people, such as Howard University, as we still know today, the historically black university, because Howard had a hand in setting that up to address education. The Freedmen's Bureau, which was a banking venture to help set newly freed slaves up financially, which ended up failing. A lot of people hated him for this. A lot of people in the U.S. government hated him. So putting him in charge of such a thing, and he, of course, sympathized with the natives, really makes for a remarkably ethically and psychologically, ideologically complicated text. And I love how Vollman is keen on bringing all sides of the conflict to life in all of their complexities. Anyhow, perspective shifts, timeline shifts, these frames are all artistically invigorated by the indentation system. But then you also get, you get those. I feel like in this book, Volman and part of what I meant by he achieved his the apogee of his artistic vision for these is he's operating on so many frames, so many superimposed frames. So as a lot of people know, Volman, he is the most dedicated writer. He is not just going to sit down and flippantly make things up. In fact, he's ridiculed his first novel, You Bright and Risen Angels, by saying, it's just too easy to sit and make things up all day. He wants to really dig in. And, he is going to basically be like a tenured professor level expert in his subject matter from all angles before he even starts writing. Well, before actually he even starts going on those locations and trying to channel the spirits of the people and the times. And what's so great is that for us, the reader, we almost get to participate in all that it took for him to bring the book together. Because he'll have these frames where he's got, General Howard in this chapter, and then it switches over to Chief Joseph and Whitebird and so on here. And it's just bringing you're getting immersed in that time. And then all of a sudden you're with Vollmann in the 1990s or the late 90s, early 2000s, and he's at some historical archive in Oregon or Washington State, right? And he's talking with an expert there, and he's observing archival photos and telling you what he's seeing. And it's just such a great way to draw us into participatory research. And I'm kind of taking that from a critical essay that's included in the anthology of critical work on William T. Vollmann, and twisting it a little bit for my own purposes here. But the other thing he does so well is finding that balance between the switching between those frames, the amount of time spent on this side of the conflict versus this side of the conflict, the amount of historical fact versus novelistic liberty necessary to bring it to life as a novel, hard pen fact and political stances and clashes, but then also poetry. I feel like in here he has achieved a concision and a compression in his poetics that aren't there in some of the others. So what I mean is, and maybe it's just that it's so spread out, but he can use just a single short sentence to paint a scene poetically in a really striking way. And he does a lot of this through parataxis and the indentation system. So as it's going through and you're getting exterior dialogue, interior monologue, narrative description, all of a sudden he'll just tack in and the blah, 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 and the blah, blah, blah. And it's usually talking about the natural landscape. But he does this with those kind of like abrupt ands and the enjambment on the page. It works perfectly. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. 289. Yeah, he's talking about this and that, and there's dialogue going on, and all of a sudden he just ends with, and white blossoms wilting on the chokecherry trees. And you can also hear that assonance, the chokecherry trees, right? Oh man, the white blossoms wilting on the chokecherry trees. So even the sound of it is poetry. And it's so short and perfectly captures the scene. Let me see if I can give you another one on 333 here. Some of it is just so simple. And the wet green leaves and our horses mincing across the shallow, cool water, and the sun hot on our necks. So this is a long, drawn-out journey, all right? And to be able to capture all that he does and yet create poetry in the midst of it and never let it sag, in my opinion, is astonishing. And I'll tell you that though this is the longest of the 7 dreams, it reads the quickest because there's a lot of white space on the page. So another thing that this allows him to do is whenever there's like a frenetic moment, like a skirmish, it allows him to capture a spatial dimension on the page. And what I mean by that is you might have General Howard sitting with his thoughts, and then all of a sudden gunfire breaking out. And he likes to use the onomatopoeia PIM, P-I-M, to capture a distant gunshot. And so you'll see it on the page. It'll be Howard here, and then all of a sudden, PIM, 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 PIM. And the effect for the reader is that you almost feel like you're hunkered down with Howard, and then you're almost experiencing the distant shot. Like you could almost hear it from coming way over here in your reading room, and then from over here. Amazing. Okay, let me move on. Another thing is that Volman, as always, when he needs to use rhetoric, when he needs to make a strong point, he can achieve the rhetorical force of Cicero. Like I've shown, if he needs poetry, he can give you the imagery of a Yeats. If he needs to convey historical, military precision, he can do that to the level of a Thucydides. At the same time, if he wants to dip into, you can tell if he has dug into one aspect of all of this history where there is contradiction, or there are lots of different views of what happened, contradicting facts. He can dip into the sort of historical speculation of a Herodotus. And then finally, in bringing people like Chief Joseph, like General Howard chiefly, to life, he can suddenly become a Plutarch, right? It's amazing the number of hats that he can wear. And all of this is filtered and brought to life to us through his persona in the Seven Dreams, William the Blind. And so, we've got these literary links back to Homer, okay? Blind Homer invoking the muses to sing of a complicated man, here being Howard. He and Milton, of course, the power and might and cosmic what? Cosmic heights, yes, but cosmic. Oh, come to me. I want this to be a continuous shot, but I'm running out of time. The cosmic consequentiality. I don't know what I'm trying to say. He takes something like this and puts it on a cosmic scale where the stakes are at such a level of that breadth of consequence. I hope I'm conveying what I'm trying to say here. All right, maybe tea will help. Where are we? So he's leading us through the story of the novel, but also the making of the novel. So let's look at page 40. Yeah, I cannot say, nor do I even know where most of them settled. For I had to leave his manuscript. This is William the Blind, the persona or surrogate of Vollmann, talking about his time there doing research. For I had to leave his manuscript, it being now nearly closing hour at the Historical Society, where Tom stood ready to inspect and explain some Indian photographs. I had served myself out of varnish-perfumed archive drawers straight from the country of dying grass. Those flashes and the way he describes them, just incredible. So that, again, that's just the example of that participatory research. All of this, so what I'm saying about him having this rhetorical force of a Roman senator combined with the poetic sensibility of a romantic poet, and then the extensive and dedicated and considered research of a tenured historian filtered through the sensibility of a novelist. All of this, I think, is conveyed in just a single excerpt here that I'm going to use, 31. And it's simple, and it's parenthetical. It says, each man's dream as heavy as the cartridge of a buffalo rifle. So much is packed into that right there that's exemplary of what I'm talking about. All right. He's so sensitive and to details and conscientious of bringing them into the work. You get the sense that Vollmann is the type who's just constantly observing, and if he gets wind that there's a certain bark of a tree that was really prevalent at the time, but is no longer, maybe I'm just coming up with stuff, he will drill into that because he's going to bring that to life. And I get the sense that he's the type who might spend 100 hours total laboring over something like that to deliver one deft sentence for the reader. You got to appreciate that. Another thing that's interesting about the dying grass in particular is that at this point in the saga of the Seven Dreams, we are now at a point where we're starting to see that guns have begun circulating among the natives. Oh, another thing I'd be remiss with by not mentioning is that he does such a great job of he keeps the narrative. What he does is he separates and switches between the narrative with the perspective of General Howard and the U.S. Army, and then the narrative of the Nez Perce. But the narrator, William the Blind, uses we, uses that first person plural perspective on both sides. I find that this is just brilliant for helping the reader constantly identify with both sides of the conflict. Because that's one thing that Vollmann is big on. He's going to present as much as he can to lay out where there may have been faults on both sides, and not just, he's aware, we're all aware of who had the most faults in this, right? To show up and drive someone off of their land is a wretched thing. And so that can almost make these types of books dead on arrival. But he doesn't want to show the dead grass. He wants to show the dying grass. He wants to put us in the midst of this turmoil and give us lots to think about on both sides. On the side of the U.S., he achieves this brilliantly by bringing Howard to life in all of his complications. All right, let me just look through a couple of these and see and just give you a couple more excerpts that I think are beautiful. Indian territory has narrowed into a long needle of broken paper, like a hair of yellow grass. If you have ever observed the way that desperately thirsty horses will slide down a bluff on their haunches in order to reach water, you may achieve some comprehension of our American need for success, which certainly beats settling for the broken down ordinariness between wars. So, like I said, when he needs to use rhetoric, he can wield it like a Cicero. He had not engaged himself in that Western dream in order to find out what he truly expected of himself. He might have gone on believing, as do so many broken down citizens, that the history of America is the tallying of what we all once had in cash. I read that already. Now the cliffs descend, the ship's white flank briefly exploding into sunny dazzlement, and the golden grass becomes a sort of sky inhabited by blue-gray clouds of trees, indentation, and striated basalt cliffs where a dark pine droops down its needles like a weeping willow, dark rock snickering irregularly through the orange grass. The world brown and gold, silver and blue, and the pale yellow of the hill grass at noon. The wettish, blondish green fleece on steep and windy slopes along the Columbia at the Dalles. The law is not about fairness, Otis. Then what's it about? His father smiled kindly. Finality, he said. He has never forgotten this. Fairness would have been best, to be sure, but at least we can achieve finality. These are hard truths. Oh, I love this. This is more of that poetic imagery. Deer prints in the mud and constellations of pale orange rocks all the way across the shallow, rapid brownness of the river, which now goes blue just before it vanishes around the bend. And the thing is, I'm giving you all these excerpts sort of together. The thing is that he really balances everything out so well. Like you never feel like, okay, get on with it, right? Meaning, okay, you've described, you've gone, you've waxed poetical for long enough. You've waxed philosophical. You've waxed expositional. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but expositorial, logical. I don't know. You never feel like that at any moment, or at least I didn't. This is when, the moment when Howard is just being very honest with his son, Guy. I think it's his son, maybe Wood. Oh yeah, it's him and General Wood, and he's saying, "But Wood, consider the army has not the strength to patrol the treaty lines. Why, right now in the Indian Territory, Hyde men are conniving with the agent, meaning the U.S. Army agent, to slaughter buffalo belonging to our Cheyennes. And we can't stop it and couldn't, even if there were 2 soldiers for every private American citizen. How much power could the president himself bring to bear? President Grant signed an executive order granting Joseph his range, and within 2 years they forced him to rescind it, meaning the ranchers, the settlers, forced the very president to rescind it because of that greed is what it comes down to. Don't you see that if we left Joseph, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, to his own devices in Wallowa, the settlers would come nonetheless, as they already have, and within 5 years, at most, he'd be ruined. So all of this leads a very remorseful and conflicted, grief-stricken Howard to conclude that the best thing for the Nez Perce is for them to go to a reservation. But of course, and he even admits at one point that he takes their view but puts it on Americans. Like if the American settlers were forced into just one prison, one painted territory, one painted land, as the Nez Perce call it, what would it feel like? So in the end, why read The Dying Grass, which can be read on its own out of sequence of the 7 Dreams? Well, like he says, I, William the Blind, have read that Sitting Bull, blah, blah, blah. It is written in these yellowing books whose word ashes I have dug and stirred like an old woman in order to write The Dying Grass. So we're reading this because we get to be the grateful recipients of an inhuman, extraordinary amount of research and consideration and critical thinking and artistry to grapple with things that are still extremely relevant in our current day. Not just with ethnic and racial clashes here in America, but at the core of who we are as human beings and what it is we want out of life and what we are willing to do in order to get it. This is an extraordinary achievement. Please do not miss it.